You think you're lonely because of who you are. Too introverted, too awkward, too much in your own head. That story feels true. It isn't. In 2026, loneliness has been declared a global epidemic, not by self-help influencers, but by the World Health Organization, the US Surgeon General, and researchers across dozens of countries. Gen Z, the most digitally connected generation in history, reports higher levels of loneliness than any previous generation. Not despite their connectivity, partly because of it. And the reason most people stay lonely isn't personality. It isn't circumstance. It's a specific set of social signals they're sending without knowing it. Signals that push people away before a real connection has a chance to form. So what are those signals? And what actually breaks the pattern? The research on loneliness has a finding that most people find deeply uncomfortable. Loneliness is self-reinforcing. Not because lonely people are inherently unlikable, but because chronic loneliness changes behavior in ways that make connection harder to find. When the brain has been in a state of social deprivation for long enough, it starts treating ambiguous social signals as threats. A neutral expression gets read as rejection. A delayed reply gets read as disinterest. A perfectly normal pause in conversation gets read as the other person wanting to leave. This hypervigilance isn't irrational. It developed as a protective mechanism, the same way physical pain tells you to pull your hand away from something dangerous. But it misfires constantly in social situations, because most ambiguous signals aren't hostile at all. They're just ambiguous. What makes this particularly damaging is that the behavioral response to perceived rejection, withdrawing, self-protecting, preemptively pulling back, looks from the outside exactly like disinterest. You're not cold because you want to be. You're cold because your brain is protecting you. But the person across from you doesn't know that. They see the withdrawal and mirror it, and the connection that might have formed never gets the chance. Here's the specific behavioral layer most people aren't aware of. Lonely people, not all but consistently across studies, emit a cluster of subtle signals that register as low warmth before they've said anything meaningful. Slightly reduced eye contact, not because they're evasive, but because eye contact feels exposing when you're already braced for rejection. A posture that's slightly more closed than open, crossed arms, a slight inward lean away from the other person. A physical self-containment that reads as unavailability. Shorter verbal responses than the conversation calls for, not because they have nothing to say, but because saying more feels like a risk. And a lag in reciprocal disclosure. When someone shares something about themselves, a lonely person is statistically less likely to match that disclosure, which breaks the reciprocity loop that social bonding depends on. None of these signals are intentional. None of them mean what they appear to mean. But they form a pattern that the other person's brain reads as, this person doesn't want to connect. And so they don't push. And the moment passes, and both people leave the conversation feeling like there was nothing there. The role of digital communication in all of this is more specific than too much screen time. The problem isn't the quantity of digital interaction. It's what digital interaction trains you to expect from in-person connection. Online, conversations are edited. There are no awkward silences because you can take 3 minutes to respond and nobody sees the pause. There's no ambiguous facial expression, no uncertain tone, no moment where you can't tell if the other person is interested or just being polite. Digital communication removes almost all of the ambiguous, uncomfortable, high-stakes moments that real human bonding actually runs on. And when you spend most of your social energy in a medium that's been stripped of those moments, in-person interaction starts to feel disproportionately difficult. Not because it's gotten harder, but because your tolerance for its natural friction has dropped. The loneliness epidemic isn't just about people spending time alone. It's about people losing the ability to sit with the discomfort that connection requires. So, what actually works? 3 things that show up consistently in the research and that run counter to most of the advice you'll hear. First, reduce the goal of the interaction. Most lonely people enter social situations with an implicit goal of forming a connection, and that goal creates performance pressure that makes the signals worse. Interactions that start with no connection goal, just curiosity about the other person, produce better outcomes because they remove the evaluation frame that makes behavior go flat. Second, practice reciprocal disclosure deliberately. When someone shares something, match it. Not the depth, necessarily, but the willingness. One personal detail for one personal detail. This sounds mechanical, but it's how bonding chemistry actually works, and starting deliberately is how you rebuild the instinct after it's atrophied. Third, reframe ambiguous signals as neutral, not negative. This is the hardest one, because it runs directly against what the lonely brain is doing automatically. But the research is consistent. People who assume neutral intent in ambiguous situations form more connections, not because they're naive, but because their behavior stays open long enough for something real to happen. So, back to where we started. You're not lonely because of who you are. You're lonely because of a set of learned signals and responses that your brain adopted as protection, and that protection is now the barrier. The story that it's your personality, your introversion, your fundamental unsuitability for connection, that story is the last defense of a system that's trying to keep you safe. It isn't keeping you safe. It's keeping you stuck. If this changed how you see your own social patterns, subscribe. Every week, Mind Decoded breaks down one more thing about human behavior that almost everyone gets wrong. And if you haven't seen our video on the 3-second window that decides whether someone trusts you before you've said a word, it's right here.